Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Satellite Designs. My name is Alex, and tonight I would like to take you all on an adventure where we paint up a creature from the deep, prehistoric oceans. My personal favorite dinosaur, though technically marine reptile, a Mosasaurus. Brought to us by the extremely talented Vincent over at Prehistoric Stampede, this beautiful creature is going to be painted relatively quickly, using techniques to make sure that everything stays harmonious, looking like it is truly underwater. If you ever look at pictures or videos of sharks, whales, fish, and any other underwater creatures, you'll notice they all have a bit of a blue/green tint to them. Since this Mosasaurus is also going to be underwater, we want all the color on it to have that same kind of blue tint. To accomplish this, we're going to be mixing a bit of a blue paint into every single mix that we use. For the darker areas, a deep pastel blue from scale 75, and for lighter areas, a lighter blue-gray from AK Interactive. Because I want this entire creature to have that underlying blue-green tint, we're going to hit the model with a primer of a deep Prussian blue. If you don't have access to blue airbrush primer, you can also just use a black primer with a white zenithal highlight, and then hit it with blue once that's all done. Once we've primed the entire thing blue, I want the top half of it, the areas facing up and facing the sun, to be a warmer color, and I want the bottom half of it, the areas facing away from the sun, to be a darker, cooler color. This part is best done with any paints that are translucent and thin. Contrast paints, inks, washes, whatever you have that is, again, translucent and thin, is the best for this type of stuff. You can do it with opaque paints, and I certainly have in the past. I just like the translucent stuff a bit better. This is also still technically the priming phase, so don't worry about being precise or overspray at all. We're gonna go back in with many layers after this, so go crazy, spray all over the place. We're just going for a vibe right now. Once we have our lights and shadows roughly blocked out, it's time to go into the first main layer of paint. This is going to be a kind of sand tan mixed with that kind of deep pastel blue. The idea I'm having for this creature is for the soft underbelly to be this lightish kind of tan blue, with the rough, tough crocodile scales on the back will be a darker, almost ultramarine or Prussian blue. Since we're starting at kind of a mid to dark tone blue, we're going to slowly, very slowly, work our way up from this dark to a nearly white color. I don't want this thing to be an orca, so we're not going to go all the way to pure white, and we're not going to start the back on pure black. We do want it to be still generally quite light and quite dark for that good contrast. We're also going to be hitting the base with a bit of this color as well. Not necessarily because I want the base to be this same kind of bluish tan, but because I know that it's going to be painted with translucent and transparent colors in the future. I'm just establishing highlights at this point. Once we've blocked out all the areas we want in this slightly lighter color, we're going to go in and add a bit more of the sand tan to make it just a bit brighter, and hit a few more areas with it with this new, slightly brighter color. Areas closer to the sun, areas that I want to pop a bit more, just anything that I want brighter will get this new, brighter color. And generally, that's kind of what this whole process for this creature is going to be. Adding a bit more lights, covering a bit less area, adding a bit more lights, and covering a bit less area. Once the skin is nice and dry and everything's ready to go, we switch to a brush and begin to actually paint out the skin pattern. This here is going to be a Celestrum blue that's going to be the foundation for most of the darker areas of the skin. When it comes to freehanding skin textures, I like to take it very slow and start to kind of map things out using dots. Using dots allows me to map out exactly where I want the stripes to be before I commit to drawing a giant line and then realize I hate the positioning. So what you'll see me doing here is placing a dot and then placing another dot, looking at it to make sure I like where it lines up, and then moving on to place more and more dots until everything looks to be in a position that I'm happy with, before finally committing to actually drawing the stripe on the face. This same process, although the inverse of it, is how we're going to draw out the spots that will be down the back of the creature. Slowly, and with some thinned down contrast paints, we will block out the rough shape of these circles running down the back, before filling them in with a thicker layer of contrast once I like the position, and the shape, and the size, and everything in between. Once I have all these spots all blocked out, we're going to start making the stripes that'll go down the body. Because I want the stripes to be brighter towards the center of the creature and darker towards the top of the creature, we're going to start with our brush towards the center and pull towards the top. As a general rule while painting, whenever you're using a brush, where the brush ends is where the most paint will usually end up, and thus will be a little bit darker. This is especially true of contrast paints, washes, and other thinned down watery paints. Because they're so watery, the pigment tends to flow a lot longer, and thus you get a lot more towards the end of the brushstroke. And the absolute most important part when it comes to painting skin tones is have fun with it. This is a creature that hasn't swam in our oceans in millions upon millions of years. No one really knows what it looks like, except for you. So, think of something fun, think of something that you think is cool. Stick with it and go crazy. At the end of the day, if you're enjoying what you're doing, that's all that matters. Painting is about having fun, about doing something that you enjoy. And so even if you're not doing something that's completely scientifically accurate, who cares? Have fun with it, go crazy, and enjoy your time. While you're having so much fun painting the skin tones of monsters, I regret to inform you that by watching this video, you have, unwittingly if not, entered into some sort of covenant with me, for lack of a better term. You see, I make these videos for completely free. I don't want your money, this isn't my job, I do it because I like to do it. But you know what you can do, what you can give me that isn't money at all? There's two buttons slightly below this video that you can hit. One says like and one says subscribe. Seeing as you're getting about 10 to 20 minutes of entertainment / education from watching these videos, is that not worth 5 seconds of your time to go down and hit that like button, to smash that subscribe button, to help me counter this horrible algorithm? Or even better yet, go down to the comments and tell me something that you like, something you want to learn about, or just something that's on your mind. I'm happy either way. Regardless, like, subscribe, comment, or all of the above, I'm happy that you're here. Thank you for watching, and let's get back to some educational stuff. Once the first layer of the skin tone began to dry, I realized rather quickly that this is way too bright. This is not quite what I was looking for. I need something far darker and far more saturated. And so, rather than continuing with the thinned down, watered down version of Celestial Blue that I've been working with, we're going straight from the pot. Now, I will almost never use contrast paints directly out of the pot for two main reasons. One, I think they're a bit too potent. They are very, very strong, very, very staining, because they are designed to literally be a one-stop shop. One coat of that should be all you need to cover your Warhammer miniatures. That's how they're designed. Secondly, they are glossy, and I, personally, do not like glossy miniatures. I like the matter look. Even when I'm painting something that is wet under the ocean, I like a nice, smooth, matte finish. But in this instance, because I want a dark, super saturated finish, we are going to take Celestial Blue straight out of the pot, and then we will apply matte medium at the very end when it's all said and done to fix that awful glossiness. Once all the contrast on the skin tone is perfectly dry, it's time to bust out the oil wash. What is an oil wash, you say? I'm very glad you asked. Let me explain it. Oil paints are extremely heavy body pigments, which means they just have a lot of color in them, held together by linseed oil typically. They dry very slowly, they blend oh so beautifully, and they're generally a pleasure to work with if you can deal with the long drying time. Somewhere in the mid-2010s, I don't know exactly when, someone figured out that you can actually thin down oil paints with white mineral spirits, the very stuff that you use as an eraser for oil paints, to make, similar to Games Workshop, washes. The cool part with these washes, though, is because they take, sometimes, days to dry, you can actually go in after applying them and, kind of like an eraser, completely erase areas you don't want to bring back a lot of the brightness that you typically can't do with a Games Workshop acrylic wash. This creates a fun workflow of taking your oil paints, thinning them down with white spirits, applying them generously all over your miniature like you would do with a wash, waiting a few hours for some of that white spirit to dry up, or depending on temperature it can be 20 minutes, and then wiping it away with a makeup brush, with a sponge, with a Q-tip, or anything like that. So using this technique, I have two things going on here. In that little pot down below, you can see there are two colors, a magenta-ish pink, and then a dark blackish blue. The magenta-ish pink is going to be for the coral, the mouth, the joints, anywhere that I think would there be a lot of color or a lot of warmth. The blackish blue is quite a bit thinner, with quite a bit more mineral spirits inside of it, and that's going to be covering basically everything else. One subtle thing to note when doing an oil wash is how much mineral spirits to apply to the oil paint. As should be relatively self-explanatory, the more mineral spirits you apply to your oil paint, the thinner the wash will be. In this particular example, I don't actually want a full wash, so I'm going to make it a little bit thicker, a little bit less mineral spirits, a little bit more oil paint, to make something a bit more akin to a contrast paint. I will still be going in and erasing a lot of this once it is largely dry, but I'm more going for a stain/tint rather than something to seep directly into the cracks and crevices of the mini. For larger 3D printed models like this that have relatively subtle scale patterns, I found that the thicker washes are generally better. You can do the thinner ones, I've used them many times and they look amazing, but because a lot of the scale patterning is relatively shallow, you're not going to get the same effects as if you do this on a big Games Workshop or Infinity or Battletech miniature with deeper, more pronounced details. Ultimately, either will work. They'll get you essentially the same thing in the very end, it's just depending on exactly what you're looking for. I want something a bit heavier, so we're going for something a bit heavier here. Once the wash is fully applied, you'll be left with something kind of like this, a sticky, oily mess, and now just give yourself about 20 minutes to an hour depending on how hot it is, and then the real magic happens. Makeup sponges and Q-tips, depending on how big your miniature is, can be used to now go in and kind of erase the areas that you don't want to be so dark. In this instance, because it is very dark, which was intentional, we're going to be erasing a pretty hefty amount of this stuff. Now this step can be extraordinarily messy depending on the size of your miniature, so I definitely recommend wearing clothes that you do not care if they get utterly destroyed. For example, don't wear a shirt that you imported from another country only to get a single drop of paint on it and ruining it forever. Don't ask how I know that. But get some junk clothes on, grab some makeup brushes, grab some Q-tips, and start erasing the areas that you don't want to be quite so dark. Now, depending on where you live in the world, you can live in a very hot environment and maybe the oil paint dries a lot faster than you anticipated. If this happens, you can actually dip these makeup brushes, dip these Q-tips in a little bit of that same white mineral spirits, and that will lift this stuff up as if it was still completely wet. One thing to take note of is as you're removing paint with these makeup sponges, the paint will naturally be on that makeup sponge. This can be both a good thing and a bad thing depending on your goals here. For example, if you're trying to lift a lot of this and get it off of the miniature, you don't want to use the side of the makeup brush that's already been used, it'll just apply more, so flip to a clean side. But conversely, if you're looking to get some cool color blends, and maybe add a little bit of one color to an area you didn't have it before, using a dirty side will transfer some of that oil paint from the brush onto the miniature. It takes a bit of getting used to, but this process is extremely forgiving, so even if you think you have completely messed it up, a little bit of white spirits can completely go back and remove all this horrible oil paint if you don't want it. And here we go. After about 48 hours of sitting in about 80 degrees Freedom Unit sun, we have a completely dry miniature that's ready to go and honestly could be called done here. But we're going to go ahead and add a little bit extra fun. Highlights time. I find that oil paints are extremely good at getting you your darkest darks and your mid-tone values, but when it comes to highlights and the brightest areas of your miniature, the best way to do that is still with a paintbrush. So I'm going in here to the areas that I want to be brighter, and just like we did with the airbrush, we're mixing in that kind of cool blue with a bit of the sand tan and applying brighter and brighter layers slowly but surely over and over again until we get to a color that I'm happy with. At least for the skin, this will be done in about 2 to 3 coats of increasing brightness, with other areas such as the darker scales in the back taking a bit less or a bit more depending on exactly how bright I want to go. Also keep an eye on how I'm not making a lot of very long, very steady brushstrokes, but rather multiple small kind of erratic brushstrokes. This is because the skin of this creature is not made of a sheet of smooth plastic, but rather hundreds if not thousands of tiny, rough, bumpy scales. Now, I could sit here and individually highlight every single scale that was lovingly sculpted into this creature, but then I would go absolutely insane. Instead, using a bunch of small brushstrokes like this will mimic that roughness, that unevenness of the scales when viewed at a normal angle or normal distance. There's a style of painting that the old masters used to use that was just a whole bunch of dots that, if you look really closely, doesn't look great. But when you zoom out, it looks absolutely amazing, and that's generally what I'm kind of going for here. An interesting quirk when it comes to aquatic creatures, especially prehistoric ones, is that they're generally shaped kind of boring. Whales, dolphins, sharks, fish, Mosasaurus, Tylosaurus, Plesiosaurus, they're all generally shaped like, well, tubes. And so something fun that I like to do is find areas on these basic tubes to add a little bit of extra spice, a little bit of highlights that might not be correct based on where the placement of the sun is, but still looks interesting. If you look here on the front flipper, there is a line going kind of down the middle of it that I'm making a little bit brighter. This is strictly because of visual interest. Truthfully, if the sun was hitting it from above, it wouldn't look like this. It would be one flat color and not have that line down the middle, extra pronounced, but I just think it looks cool. So we're adding it because ultimately, painting is about making something look cool, and that's what we're trying to do. This same exact technique of taking the base color, adding a bit of that neutral desaturated blue, and increasing the brightness slowly but surely layer by layer, will be used all across this creature. Starting with the mouth, moving on to the back, the blue spots on the side, the teeth, the coral, and even the little ichthyosaur on the bottom. Every single piece of this miniature will be hit with this technique at some point to get it to a color and a brightness that I'm happy with. Once all that is done, we can start working on the final part, and what I consider to be the coolest part of painting stuff like this, the UV fluorescent section. Oh, you thought I wasn't going to make it glow in the dark? Of course, it has to glow in the dark. It has to glow under UV light. That's part of the fun. I love miniatures that glow in the dark. In fact, I love everything that glows under UV light. And so to prep for that, we're going to layer on some of a light, neutral, bluish, gray color. UV paints are rather impotent, and so they need a bright light color underneath them in order to properly show. Since I want this entire creature to look like it's underwater, we're going to start this off using the same gray-blue that I mentioned at the beginning. In certain sections, like the blue spots and some of the areas on the back, I'll go in with a lighter version of this, just mixed with white, to make it a bit brighter, make it pop a bit more, but for the most part, this is almost straight out of the pot, but slightly thinned down, gray-blue from AK Interactive. One thing you'll pretty frequently hear from artists and painters way more talented than I'll ever be is the rule of 3. Essentially what this means is to make something look interesting, you want 3 colors. A primary, a secondary, and a tertiary. For this Mosasaurus, the primary color is going to be the bright, kind of off bluish white, the secondary color, the dark ultramarine of the backs and the scales, and the tertiary color is going to be the opposite of those two, which is going to be a bright fluorescent orange. But, like I said at the very beginning, we want this whole creature to look like it's underwater. And so this orange is going to be mixed in with just a little bit of that kind of off bluish gray to make it look like it too is underwater. I usually really don't like painting fluorescence with a brush. They're very impotent, like I mentioned. You have to use so many different layers. They're kind of chunky, and I just generally don't like it. But since we're using them fairly precisely, we don't want a lot of overspray, we want them only in specific areas, we gotta use a brush. What this does mean is I'll have to go in with multiple different coats of the same exact color over and over again to get it to the consistency, to get to the vibrancy that I'm looking for. These UV paints are very good, I will admit. They are some of the best I've ever used. They're from Scale 75. I love them. But to get what I'm looking for, I'm still going to have to go in with about 3, maybe even 4 coats of this stuff to get it just right. Also, since the goal here is to have this look good under UV light, it's important to paint this under UV light. Just make sure when you're painting under UV light that you don't paint under exclusively UV light. You don't want your eyes to burn out before you turn 50, so in this instance, I like to have the UV light set to about 25%, with my regular light set to about 75%. That way, I can still see what it's going to look like under UV without burning my eyes out at the same time. Safety third, after all. After that, we'll do a quick dry brush of sand tan, mixed with that blue, all over the base, paint up the ichthyosaur exactly like we did the Mosasaurus, and then, I believe, we're all done. Thank you all for joining me on this wonderful adventure here. I'd like to take this time now to address some questions and comments that I'm receiving down in the comment section. I feel like this is a bit more fun than just typing something up down below, but I'll definitely type responses if you need one as well. First up, a lot of people are saying, hey, you finally made a channel, in which I say, yeah, I did it. Thank you. I appreciate the support. I'm glad there's some enthusiasm for what I'm doing here, and I will hope to make more videos as the time goes on. Although they take a bit of time, it's going to be about 1 a month until I figure out how to do this a lot faster. Oh well. There's also a question down here from Juan Pablo Estrada Palacio 7345 saying, hello Satellite. I'm about to start my journey painting miniatures and I really love your work. Thank you. I want to see more videos and hear about your painting techniques. I love to paint a dragon, but I can't find any reference. I'll love to see one video about dragons. Well, Juan Pablo, you are in luck. The next video will most likely be a dragon unless I finish a quick little short beforehand. Keep an eye out. There will be a amethyst dragon coming soon. As always, I hope you've all had a wonderful time. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, leave them down below in the comments. If you have anything you want to say, leave it down below in the comments. Like, subscribe, have a wonderful evening, good night, and good luck.